Just why exactly did Israel recognise Somaliland? For more than 30 years, this African territory has been seeking international acceptance. However, despite building democratic institutions and maintaining an unprecedented degree of peace in an unstable region, no member of the United Nations has been willing to recognise it as an independent country. Until now. On the 26th of December 2025, amidst a chorus of global condemnation, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced that his government had established diplomatic relations with Somaliland. So, why exactly did Israel take such a significant step? And what exactly does it mean for Somaliland, the region, and the broader international system? Hello and welcome. I'm James Ker-Lindsay, and here I take an informed look at international relations, conflict, and security. Recognition is central to international relations. It's how states formally accept one another as equal members of the global system. It also allows embassies to be set up, treaties to be signed, and diplomatic relations to be established. However, recognition isn't automatic, nor is it governed by a central international authority. Instead, it's a sovereign political act. Every country decides for itself who it recognises and who it doesn't. This exclusive right of recognition is especially sensitive in cases involving breakaway territories. In such situations, recognition isn't about making the typical legal judgment of whether a territory meets the established criteria for statehood. Instead, it's a highly significant political decision that often carries broader implications. Aside from the effects on relations with the state that claims sovereignty over the breakaway territory, it also challenges fundamental principles such as the respect for the territorial integrity of states. This is why recognition of de facto states is so rare and so controversial. Somaliland is located in the Horn of Africa. Djibouti is to its northwest, Ethiopia to its south, and Somalia lies to the east. Meanwhile, with the Gulf of Aden and the Red Sea to its north, it lies across from Yemen and the Arabian Peninsula. Its population stands at around 5 million and is mainly made up of Sunni Muslims from the Izak, one of the main Somali clans. Somaliland's modern political history begins with British colonial rule. In June 1960, it finally gained independence as the state of Somaliland. However, just days later, it voluntarily united with neighbouring Italian Somaliland to its south to form the Somali Republic. But while the decision was driven by a shared sense of Somali nationalism, the union was profoundly unequal. Political power and economic resources were concentrated in the south, in the capital, Mogadishu, while the northern regions were increasingly marginalised. This alienation increased after a military government took power in 1969. Under the country's dictator, Mohamed Siad Barre, the north faced brutal repression. This would last until May 1991. As the Barre regime was overthrown and Somalia collapsed into a brutal civil war, Somaliland seized the opportunity to declare independence. Over the next 3 decades, Somaliland began an ambitious process of state building. While Somalia sank deeper into chaos, it established its own political institutions, currency, armed forces, and held regular elections. As a result, Somaliland came to be seen as an island of stability in a deeply troubled region. And even though this reputation has been tarnished in recent years by delayed elections, rising political tensions, and violent clashes in its eastern areas where its control is now contested, it's nevertheless remained far more functional than Somalia, which has struggled to re-establish stability. But despite these achievements, Somaliland's campaign for international recognition made no progress. While it established informal relations with several major countries, including Britain and the United States, this didn't lead to formal recognition. Likewise, suggestions that Ethiopia or the United Arab Emirates, both of which have been eager to develop Somaliland's valuable port facilities, could recognise the territory, these came to nothing. Even talk that the Trump administration might recognise it have proved fruitless, at least until now. The only notable, though limited moment of progress came in 2020 when Somaliland established relations with Taiwan. And it's for all these reasons that Israel's decision marks such a dramatic break. In a surprise announcement made on the 26th of December, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu confirmed that Israel had formally recognised Somaliland as an independent state and that the two sides were establishing diplomatic relations. In addition to opening embassies, they'd also agreed to develop economic and security cooperation. Needless to say, the news was greeted with jubilation in Hargeisa, the Somaliland capital. After 30 years in diplomatic limbo, it had finally won acceptance from its first UN member state. However, beyond this, the announcement has been roundly criticised. For a start, Somalia has reacted with fury, condemning Israel's decision as a violation of its sovereignty and territorial integrity. Meanwhile, broader international reactions have been overwhelmingly negative. Reiterating their commitment to Somalia's territorial integrity, African states have warned against unilateral actions that could destabilise the region. So too have Arab states, calling out Israel's decision as another example of its disregard for international norms. Indeed, the matter was even brought before the UN Security Council. But while Somalia and its supporters demanded that the decision be formally condemned, the United States defended Israel's right to choose its own diplomatic relations. This, in effect, has blocked any binding UN resolution against Israel and closed the door to any formal sanctions for its recognition. I hope you're finding this useful. If so, please do give it a like and perhaps consider subscribing for regular updates on international relations. Thanks so much, and now back to the video. But of course, Israel's decision raises a number of important questions. First of all, there's the issue of why did Israel take such a controversial step? The most obvious explanation is strategic geography. Somaliland occupies a highly sensitive location near the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which connects the Red Sea to the Indian Ocean. A significant proportion of global trade passes through this narrow waterway. And in recent years, it's become a significant security concern due to attacks by Iranian-backed Houthi forces operating from neighbouring Yemen. From Israel's perspective, Somaliland's location at this critical choke point is invaluable, offering opportunities for intelligence gathering, security cooperation, and direct access to a region of growing strategic importance. But while this explanation certainly makes sense, there's possibly a more sinister element to the story. Reports have suggested that Somaliland has been earmarked as a potential location to resettle Palestinians expelled from Gaza. Of course, whether this is the case has yet to be seen. And this brings us to the second question. Was recognition really necessary? Could Israel have achieved these objectives without taking such a controversial step? In truth, the answer is almost certainly yes. It has a long history of operating quietly and pragmatically in sensitive regions without formal diplomatic ties, and Somaliland would almost certainly have been grateful for upgraded relations short of diplomatic recognition. In this sense, recognition probably wasn't necessary. But by taking such a monumental decision, Israel will almost certainly have cemented a long-term partnership based on profound gratitude. And this brings us to the third question. Can anything be done to reverse Israel's recognition? In simple terms, the answer is no. Again, recognition is a sovereign act. There's no legal mechanism to compel a state to withdraw this decision. While Somalia can protest the decision and lobby other countries to press Israel to change its mind, it's unlikely to change anything. Israel will have factored all this in before it made its move. The countries most likely to be furious about the decision are already angry with Israel. Meanwhile, Israel's allies won't see this as important enough to break ties. In this sense, the decision to recognise Somaliland comes at little cost for Israel's diplomatic standing. But while all these are important points, perhaps the most crucial question is what Israeli recognition is likely to mean. Will other countries now follow its lead, or will Somaliland remain isolated? If Israel remains the only recogniser, while Somaliland will certainly gain some practical benefits, it will remain largely outside the international system. In contrast, if others follow, the consequences would be profound. Of course, the most important actor at this stage is the United States. But while many will inevitably see Israel's move as a precursor to US recognition, Washington has so far remained cautious. While it defended Israel's right to decide on recognition within the Security Council, it was noticeable that it didn't support the actual decision itself. Instead, the United States has said that its position remains unchanged. And perhaps for good reason. Given the wave of condemnation we've seen, Washington may not want to antagonise either the African Union or key Arab partners over what many in the US would see as a relatively minor issue. At this stage, therefore, a more likely scenario is a prolonged period of hesitation as Washington assesses the costs and benefits of following Israel's example. But if it also recognised Somaliland, things could change radically, especially if Ethiopia and the United Arab Emirates then followed suit. This could potentially open the way for many more countries to follow. But for now, there's a deep irony to this whole story. For Somaliland, recognition by the United States or another African country would perhaps have been the most valuable validation of its claim to statehood. In contrast, Israel's decision risked politicising its cause and tying it to broader Middle Eastern geopolitical struggles. All this will almost certainly complicate future recognition efforts rather than accelerating them. And yet, none of this diminishes the significance of what has happened. For Somalilanders, this is a moment of genuine jubilation. After 30 years of trying, the first step towards broader international recognition has finally been taken. Likewise, for Israel, it represents a strategic foothold in a critical region. Meanwhile, for the international system as a whole, this move is a stark reminder that recognition is never simply about law or principle. It's about power, timing, and political calculations. Once recognition is granted, even by a single state, the international landscape is changed in ways that cannot easily be undone. In this sense, Israel's decision to recognise Somaliland is another sign that the old rules of international relations are now changing. I hope you found that useful. If so, here are some more videos that YouTube thinks you might find useful. Thanks so much for watching, and see you in the next video.